Hi, I'm Stephanie from History Unboxed, and I'm here talking to Kelly today. Kelly is a wonderful resource for the homeschool community on everything having to do with Native education. So thank you for being with me, Kelly.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I am a citizen of the Lipan Apache tribe of Texas. And I'm culturally intact, and I raise my children traditionally, and we speak some of our language. And I've been involved in my local and tribal Native communities my entire life, and also have been a Native American rights activist since my teens. And I'm a third generation member of the American Indian movement. My family was displaced from Texas as a result of the sale of my grandmother in 1929. And I've always wanted to move home. And so in 2019, I moved my family home to Texas. And I homeschool my children. And I spent a lot of time with educational resources. And I've been teaching about Native people, both past and present, for many years now. I've been hired at historic sites, libraries, schools, museums, and various events to teach children and adults. And I teach online and in person as well. And I also work for an online education company, and I'm a paid consultant with multiple curriculum companies to help them develop better education about Natives and within their curriculum, as well as help remove problematic and inaccurate resources. My son is the youngest published Native American author on record that we know of, and I co-authored a book with him. And then I also teach seminars and workshops for teachers and educators about how to identify Native stereotypes in literature and educational materials, and then how to choose better materials. I run a blog, and I review the Native content in educational resources. And then I'm also a member of a committee in Texas to develop a high school Native studies curriculum for the entire state of Texas that we're launching this year and hoping to get state approved next year. So that's a little bit about what I do.
That's amazing because Texas is so influential. So that's really exciting to hear.
Yeah.
I imagine when you're working with adults, there's a lot of re-educating that has to happen based on the experiences of many adults going through the school system and the approaches to Indigenous history.
Oh yeah, a significant amount of re-education. When I teach, teacher workshops, or I've actually helped train the teachers that are going to be teaching our Native Studies curriculum this year, and there's a lot of like, wait, what? And questions and confusion, because there's so many things that people learn about us that is just wrong, incorrect, a lot of stereotypes, just a lot of misinformation, a lot of things they don't learn about us that they never had any idea of. And so, yeah, with adults, it's quite a bit of unlearning that they have to do.
Yeah, I know. I have every conversation I see with you online, I feel like I learned something new about history. And, I've spent the past years immersed in history and still have so much to learn. So what made you decide to home educate your children?
There was a lot of factors involved in that decision, a lot. But we started homeschooling from the very beginning. That was not something that we did later after public education. I had a lot of harmful and Native experiences as a Native child in majority white schools growing up. And I did not want my children to go through those things. I also wanted to have a culturally competent Indigenous centered education for them. And so being able to homeschool them, I can build that myself, and I can incorporate our own culture and worldview into what we learn and how we learn things. And then I also wanted my children to have the freedom to learn in a way that meets their individual needs and learn at their own pace, and to be able to move around and do things and not have to be stuck at a desk, that kind of thing. And so it was just, like I said, there's a lot of factors in that decision. There's a few of them, but we've been homeschooling from the beginning. So
how old are your kids now?
They are 11 and will be 14 in a week. So they're going into 6th and 9th grades this year.
So that high school course is really close to home, it sounds like.
Oh yeah, yeah, and it's fun. I'm having a lot of fun trying to plan our high school plan together and figure that out and what he wants to learn and focus on. And so it's going to be exciting. It's going to be really fun.
So I know you've created a lot of things yourself, but when you're evaluating resources to use or to recommend to other people, obviously you're looking for things that aren't harmful. But what are you sort of looking at, either that pushes something into a recommendation or that's a red flag for you?
Yeah, so the best way to learn about us is from us. I tell people that all the time. Students, kids, adults, I tell everybody the best way to learn about us is directly from us. So I mostly use and recommend materials that are made by Native people or written by Native people. If the author is not Native, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a bad book, but I do look at a lot of other factors in evaluating those authors. And then beyond that, I also look for contemporary representation as much as possible, even with historic subjects, because of the connections between past and present. And so I do look for contemporary representation, how we're represented if we don't exist past a certain date. And also the dates that materials are published. A lot of older materials tend to have a lot of issues. And so I do look at like how recent they are. And like I said, with the authors, if they're not Native, there's a lot of things that I look into regarding the author and their, qualifications and what makes them have the ability to write this book and think that they know what they're talking about. And sometimes you can find really good materials, but a lot of times the non-Native authored books and materials are a lot less likely for me to want to recommend. So,
are there Native authors that really stand out to you when people are looking for books?
There's so many Native authors. With my son being a published author, he's got several books out and he's working on another one. I'm in the author world as well. And I'm trying to write some books and I've submitted some things to some publishers and things like that. So there's just so many amazing Native authors. I don't know if there's any that like really, really stand out at me. Just there's a lot that I love.
You have, I know you have a lot of information on your blog. Can you share that address?
So it's nativecurriculumreview.blogspot.com.
Okay.
And I mostly just look at popular curriculums, both secular and Christian curriculums that people use, homeschool and public. Actually, I'm looking at Core Knowledge and Studies Weekly right now because there's a lot of issues in those. So I look at mostly curriculum. I do recommend a few things. There's a few posts on there that are more like recommendations or, so like do's and don'ts of how to teach about natives. But mostly it's like reviews of curriculum and things.
Aside from looking for Native authored things, and presumably if you can find somebody from that particular nation that's the more connected, the better, right?
Yeah.
Do you have other recommendations for people who are looking to increase their focus in history?
Yeah, so the first thing that I remind people is that we're not just history. And I know that, you're a history company, and so obviously the focus is on history. And that makes sense, it's fine. But I meet adults that don't even know that we exist. And actually a recent poll found that 40% of adults in the United States do not know that Native Americans still exist today. And so just remembering that we're not just history, we still exist, and then incorporating contemporary natives into your learning is really important. And for history, actually, because for younger kids, I find it's best to start with modern natives, like who we are today, and then go into history, because it gives them something tangible to connect the past to, instead of just some mythical idea of the vanished Indian that a lot of kids get.
Yeah, for sure.
And so especially for younger kids, I recommend starting with contemporary natives and then going into the history. For older students, either way is fine, but it's still important to make those connections between the past and the present when learning history. Like I said, use Native authored and made materials as much as possible. And then incorporating natives into all eras of history, not just the ones that are commonly associated with us. Like oftentimes people they talk about us with the contact and colonies and westward expansion and the Oregon Trail, and then that's it. Like we don't really exist anymore. And we only exist in those little pockets, of history. We typically disappear in Topist around 1900. 87% of textbooks don't mention us past 1900. And so incorporate us into all eras of history, right? Also the 20th and 21st centuries when you're learning, 1900s and world wars and all that stuff, where are Native people in this? Right. And as well as topics that are less commonly associated with us, like slavery. Millions of Native people were enslaved. The Civil War, what's going on with Native people during the Civil War, the World Wars, how are Native people involved in that, right? So incorporating us into topics that are less commonly associated with us is a really good thing to do as well. And then realizing that most of what you've been taught or have learned is likely false. And so a lot of what people think they know about us is stereotypes, harmful and false ideas, misinformation. So being sure to unlearn those harmful things as you find better resources and learn more accurate things, trying to unlearn the stuff that you were taught as well.
Yeah. Your past and present makes me think of something that I didn't learn until doing some of the research for these boxes. When it comes to the study of war, that Native Americans serve at a higher rate than any other group in the United States. And as you said, we don't hear about it past, the early conflict with colonizers. So that was really opened my eyes. You might hear about the code talkers, but not much beyond that. What are some specific places that we can look for Native authored resources?
There's a lot of resources out there that are really great. Unfortunately, the most popular resources that get recommended and used in curriculum are really terrible. So usually if it's really popular or it's in curriculum, certain curriculums and things like that, it's probably not good. But there are some really great places to look. One place I like a lot is oyate.org. It is no longer an organization. And so the website is really, I just use it informationally. Their shop, I don't think you can really purchase through the shop anymore because the organization hasn't existed for 10 years. But I use it kind of as a place to look. If Oyate lists it, then it's probably, it's a good material. And I know people that used to be involved in that organization as well. And so, if it's in that shop, it's listed there, it's a good material. So I like to use that as kind of like a resource shopping area. They also have a really good resources tab on their website that you can find other information that aren't books, but just things that they have posted that are really great. Debbie Reese's blog, American Indians and Children's Literature, is a really amazing blog. You can find recommendations as well as reviews and books to avoid. Cynthia Latex Smith is a Native author, and she has a really great website, cynthialatexsmith.com. And she recommends a lot of resources. She interviews authors. There's a lot of really great things on there. She's a children's and young adult author. Some of my daughter's favorite picture books are by her. So her website's really great. She's got a lot of really good information. Native Knowledge 360, which is done by the National Museum of the American Indian, is a really great resource, especially for teachers. It works for homeschool families too. They have entire lessons, but they're designed for public school use. But the Native Knowledge 360 website is amazing, especially their essential understandings. I really like that part of it. And then they have some really great lessons on there. Native-land.ca is a really cool interactive map that you can use.
And that's an app too, right?
I think so. I think there's an app as well, yeah. And then the websites of specific Native nations actually oftentimes have a lot of really great information about those nations, about their history, about their governments, about just a lot of things, contemporary things, culture. So just looking up the websites of specific Native nations is also a really great place to learn.
Thank you. And I know when I was reading through your website, there was a specific activity book that you recommend. There was another one that was one to avoid. What's the title of the one that you recommended?
A Kid's Guide to Native American History.
And what makes those hands-on activities respectful and non-appropriative versus a lot of other activities that maybe are inappropriate because they're stereotypes or cultural appropriation? Right.
So the Kid's Guide to Native American History is made by a Native author. And so, they avoid putting in things that are obviously going to be inappropriate. They're not, a lot of them aren't necessarily cultural items that they're having you make. They're things that just enhance your learning about them. Like there's a part of it that there's a part of the book that talks about a famous native poet, and then they have you write poetry in that style, right? Or, you learn about ledger art, and then you can try drawing that ledger art style of art, right? But they're not doing things like, dream catchers and making little teepees and things like that. They tie into the lessons, they tie into what's taught in the book, but they're not like, let's make cultural items from Native people kind of things, so they're really fun. They're fun activities. There's a lot of recipes too. There's games as well, not just crafts, but games and things. So there's a lot of really fun activities in there that you can do as a family together. And they're all respectful. They're all appropriate. They're not taking things that shouldn't be turned into like crafty things and stuff.
Yeah.
So. And there's actually several other books that are like that. There's one that I've already done a review of on my blog, but there's others that I haven't reviewed. I own them. I have like boxes, Rubbermaid tubs full of bad books. Like I have a closet full of Rubbermaid tubs of bad books. I collect them. I have tons of them, hundreds of them. Not only for reviewing, but for teaching with. I teach workshops, hands-on workshops and seminars for teachers. And so I need to have a lot of these materials. And so I have several other of those types of like hands-on activity kind of learning books that I'm going to be reviewing that are all really terrible. The only one that I like is A Kid's Guide to Native American History.
For people that are seeking out activities to supplement their studies, do you recommend very specific sort of documented games and recipes as sort of a safer territory for people that are unsure but want to be respectful, rather than, as you say, recreating cultural items?
So like specific things, or?
Well, like if you are studying the Hopi, going and seeking out a recipe from a Hopi food blogger, would that be, a good activity for somebody who's looking for a hands-on experience for that specific group?
Right. So, going directly to the nations, a lot of times they'll have some cool information on their websites or recommendations of things that you can do. But, you can visit cultural centers or Native American museums. Like the National Museum of the American Indian is amazing. There's also a lot of other Native museums run by Native nations throughout the United States. You can go to cultural events that are open to the public, like powwows and other cultural events, community events. Interact with us like normal people. That's a great way to find out about Native people, is just interacting with us and being around us, and not in like a tell me everything kind of way, but right. Just like interacting with us like you interact with everybody else. Avoiding, like there's those big things, like don't make costumes and paper headdresses and things like that. Avoid things that are not crafts or that have like cultural and religious significance. Things like dream catchers, masks, totem poles, spirit animals, even teepees in traditional homes. People like to make models of those. But a lot of those have a lot of cultural and religious significance, and that's not really appropriate either. Okay. So models of Native homes is not great. It also kind of keeps us in this past like Stone Age mindset that people have about us that's false. And I'm in my office in my house right now. Like this is what my home looks like. I don't live in a teepee. I get that question all the time. Yeah.
That sounds like an excellent children's book right there, to turn the stereotype on its head. Different kinds of, oh, you have one?
Do all Indians live in teepees?
That's fantastic. I love it. I love that you described it.
Full of, questions like that, and then answers from Native people. There's actually a lot of books like this that exist. This is one example, but there's several others that are really good. All the Real Indians Died Off. I can't find that on my shelf right now. All the Real Indians Died Off by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz is amazing. And there's another one, American Indian Stereotypes and Realities. It's really good, but this one's just like direct questions that we get these kinds of questions all the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, you said to be a good name for a book. There is one.
Of course. That makes
a shelf over here with my desk full of Native books and materials.
Oh man, that's fantastic. I wish I could come browse your library, because I'm sure it's amazing. Do you have any other recommendations that you'd like to share before we sign off?
Um, there's a lot of really great films and documentaries out there, actually. Native film, native TV is like booming right now. I don't know if you've heard of the new TV shows like Rutherford Falls and Reservation Dogs.
Yeah, I just
Those
heard
are
of
really
Reservation Dogs.
for, like older high school and adult kind of things, not kids, but native filmmakers, native actors and actresses, native directors are like, we're having like this big boom of it right now. It's amazing because we've never had that kind of contemporary real representation. And we love it. It's incredible. My teenage son is really loving Reservation Dogs right now because we also know some of the people in it. And so it's really fun to see people. And but there's a lot of really great native films and documentaries out there as well, native made documentaries on PBS as well as Amazon Prime Video, things like Rumble, The Indians Who Rocks the World, that one's incredible. Gather, I really love Warrior Women. That's a really great documentary about some of the women behind the American Indian movement. The We Shall Remain series on PBS is always really good. It's an older series, but it's incredible. It's got a lot of really good information about a few different time periods in history, including the American Indian movement, Red Power movement in the 1970s. Let's see, I'm trying to think of some other things. Native pop culture is a great window into our worlds. It's a great way to learn about our past and our present. So using native pop culture is a really fun way to learn about us. It's one of my favorite things to teach about, but I don't get a whole lot of interest in those classes. I have entire classes on native pop culture. I could probably teach an entire class on native memes entirely. I really have like 900 in my phone. So there's a lot of really amazing stuff you can learn through our pop culture, through our social media. There's a lot going on in that world that people don't tend to look at, but it's really fun. And it's a great way to learn, including about our past too, because kind of tie all that in together. So using native pop culture is really fun. It makes learning a little bit more exciting.
I've seen some really amazing music videos lately. It wasn't North American. Maybe it was a Brazilian language that's endangered, and they made this like heavy metal music video, and it was so cool because they contrasted like more traditional imagery with very metal imagery. It was amazing, and really, like as you said, they're still here.
Yeah. So I use a lot of music videos in classes that have nothing to do with pop culture, actually. They're really fun. Like I said, they're a great window into our worlds. There's a lot of really great native musicians out there. There's even a whole lot of like hip hop in native languages. It's really fun to listen to. And there's just a lot of really incredible music out there. The Native American Music Awards happens every year, and you can find a lot of really incredible musicians through that. I like to tell kids, like for like long classes or things that I'm doing, like if I teach at a homeschool co-op or at a school or something like that, look up famous Native people, but not long time ago. Because if you say look up Native people, famous Native people, they're going to look up like Sitting Bull and Geronimo, but I say look up famous Native people that are still alive today, find out who they are, what they do, what nation they're from, and learn all about them. And that's a fun thing because that's contemporary, that's modern. There's a lot of really cool famous people in history to learn about, even in the 1900s that aren't still alive today. But when you focus on modern Native people, there's a lot of really cool stuff you can find out. And then another thing when it comes to arts and crafts and things like that, try to remember not to call our arts crafts. They're art, right? There's a lot of hands-on arts that you can do. That's fun. That's not appropriative, but call it what it is. It's art. It's not crafts. Like I'm, when I do beadwork or when I they're cultural arts. It's not just something we do, crafts, arts and crafts kind of thing, people tend to call them crafts all the time. And that bugs me. That's like, it's not a craft, it's an art. Even if it's not the type of medium that we typically think of when we think of art, because we have this, there's this Eurocentric lens of what art is, especially in the United States. There's a lot outside of those genres that are art, and people call them crafts, and that bugs me. So that's another thing to keep in mind when you are doing hands-on activities.
Yeah.
Art.
Thank you for that perspective. That's very valuable.
I'm trying to think if there's any other recommendations that I can think of that I have that you haven't asked me about. That's it.
Well, thank you very much for talking today. I appreciate your time, your labor. It was really special to get to talk to you.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to do it. I mean, I do this because I want people to learn about us in a good way. I want people to learn about us correctly. It impacts my life, it impacts my kids' lives, how people treat us. A lot of people don't realize how education directly impacts Native people. When people learn all these stereotypes and false ideas about us, it leads to violence, it leads to racism, it leads to a lot of harm against our communities. Children that are miseducated about us grow up to become adults that then have jobs that directly impact us, like politicians, different community leaders. You know, the way people interact with us is impacted by that. And a lot of people don't even realize they have stereotypes and racist ideas about us in their minds. They've just been taught these things and they think that's reality. They don't even realize that, you know, and so it does directly impact us, and it impacts me and my kids. And that's why I got into this all these years ago. I never wanted to be in education, but I do this because I want people to know the right things. I want people to know true things about us so that it improves the lives of Native people and non-Native people. It improves how we interact with each other. It improves how society functions in that regard. It really has a massive impact beyond the classroom, beyond your homeschool, and beyond your own kids. It really, really has a major impact. And so that's why I like to do this.
Thank you.